Okay, thanks very much. Really nice group that we have here. So it's my pleasure to introduce again Jigar Raythatha. Jigar's got a really interesting background that we'll explore. Did a bachelor's in biochemistry and economics at Rutgers, which I think is a really intriguing juxtaposition of two dynamic fields, both analytic in some way, but not always as obviously related, certainly from an academic perspective, followed by an MBA from Columbia. Took his first role as a business analyst at A.T. Kearney, did marketing and BD in a variety of roles at Biogen, moving up the ranks there. Then joined Red Abbey Ventures, initially as a fellow, and then as a venture partner, and then a partner at Red Abbey Ventures. And then where I first met Jigar was at Constellation, where he headed up corporate and business development. And Jigar and I think, worked closely together trying to drive the company forward. I think Jigar was the major architect of Constellation's transformative deal with Genentech, and personally, I regretted seeing Jigar leave Constellation after the Genentech deal, but I think certainly understood, because BD was largely done. We'd signed kind of a monogamous relationship with Genentech, and so it didn't leave a great deal of business development. He then headed to Jounce, which was a company that was still in the early incubation stage. In fact, I think was the first full-time employee, became the chief business officer. And again, Jigar was the architect and driving force for a transformative deal with Celgene that really set Jounce up to move forward and to enable their platform. In 2017, had the pleasure of being part of re-recruiting Jigar back to Constellation as CEO. And so again, I think a topic that we can explore, how do you go back home to rejoin a company where you'd played a senior role, but not the senior role, and come back in as the CEO. And then I had the uncomfortable and unfortunate opportunity to explain to Jigar that I was leaving shortly after recruiting him to come here and come back to Chicago. But you can see that we've remained friends throughout this. And so it's my pleasure to introduce and to welcome Jigar Raythatha to Chicago.
Jim, what you left out was after you told me that you were leaving, I had a chance to then recruit you as a member of the board of directors of Constellation. So we continue to work together,
right, as
colleagues even today. I think I'll see you in about a week.
Yeah, that's great, and that's been a wonderful opportunity. Yeah. And again, we can talk about that. So I've got a series of questions that I've outlined. I've taken a few questions from the audience in advance, but we're certainly open it up to others' questions along the way. But I'll go ahead and get started with a few of mine. So you're now the successful CEO of Constellation Pharmaceuticals. How'd you get started in biotech? What gave rise to the career?
Yeah, so I mean, you kind of mentioned kind of the early days back at Rutgers, where I was doing research kind of in the molecular biology department, but also had other interests on the business side as well. I think what I learned pretty early on in those days is that I had a strong interest in science, but I was just terrible in the lab, and I just I didn't have the patience and the carefulness that it takes to really run an experiment all the way through to the end without making a mistake and figuring out kind of how to go back and dissect that. And so, so kind of as I kind of finished up at Rutgers, well enough kind of in the coursework, but just recognized that from just it wasn't a fit for me kind of in the laboratory. And I wanted to find a way to kind of merge the ability to really kind of grasp the science, but without having to actually design and run experiments. And essentially what I learned over the course of the time is that I really was able to connect with scientists and become kind of an information node. And that really served me well. I essentially started my career at Biogen at almost right out of college, except for that short stint in management consulting. And it was just a dynamic time. It was I kind of think of it as kind of a golden age kind of period, and a really just an ideal place for someone kind of early 20s to start their career. I mean, just kind of the backdrop was that Biogen, had been an established company. I mean, they were started in the late 70s, but it only kind of in the the mid 90s, kind of 1996, they launched their first product, and that was Abonex, a drug for multiple sclerosis, interferon beta, and that. I joined a couple of years after that, and the company was in extreme growth mode. They managed to maintain kind of the worldwide commercial rights, and so now they were fully integrated research, development, manufacturing, commercial, U.S., Europe, but they didn't have kind of the people and the infrastructure to kind of deliver on everything they needed to do. So if you were a young person that had initiative, it was actually a fantastic place to be. And so
it was kind of the wild, wild west of biotech there in Cambridge at that point, wasn't it?
Yeah. And so, I would really, if folks are looking to get into industry for the first time, kind of finding a company in that mode where there's, sufficient meaty things to delve into, not enough people to do the work. It's actually a really kind of great experience. And the way I functioned was kind of as an information node. I knew kind of scientists and manufacturing people and clinicians and business people all had to communicate, and we're kind of spread out over a number of buildings. And I kind of ended up kind of being the person that, pulled together a lot of things and kind of kept them moving forward. And that was another kind of valuable, I didn't realize it then, but the way I was functioning kind of really brought, progress to the team, and kind of continued to kind of think I try to utilize some of that in Constellation.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think you did that extremely well at Constellation. I can remember, some of those early conversations, with you, me, Patrick, Rob, and, how you were great at helping to crystallize the ideas and help us get our messaging across based on the content and the data that we were generating. And so I like this concept of being an information node. I think that's good. You've done a lot over the course of your career. What are you the most proud of?
I think it is this past year and a half has been. I'll focus. There's a lot I'm proud of personally, but kind of professionally, it's been a transformative experience for me. I didn't know that whether or not I'd be successful at running a company. It just, I think until you do it, you really can't know. And, Constellation kind of a year and a half ago, we were at a crossroads and we really needed to kind of figure out which way was up. And, I think coming out of our Genentech collaboration, weren't completely on firm footing. And coming back to, work with people who were peers and in some cases much more senior to me, and trying to galvanize the team behind a vision was a kind of a daunting task coming into it. But I feel like it's working, and I've been able to really form a very tight camaraderie with our leadership team, but also, just about everyone in the company. And I can take a lot of effort to build those relationships and kind of foster that and kind of get everyone on the same page behind the vision that we've created for ourselves. And I think that's really been the propellant for us in the last year and a half to achieve what we have. And to me, that's kind of professionally been the most kind of, the thing that I take most pride in, kind of being able to galvanize that team and get them to trust me, to think about things in a little bit different way.
Yeah, you had a couple of hard things that you had to deal with because you, in your early tenure as CEO, you had some attrition in the C-suite, right? The CSO and CMO were, you know,
CFO too.
and the CFO left as well. And so how'd you deal with that? You know, because you were a pretty you're on your maiden voyage as CEO going through that as well.
Yeah. So fear, I think, is kind of you know, particularly Jim, when some of those changes, I think, you know, probably would have been needed to be made in other way. But I think my partnership with you was one that I valued. I think even when I left Constellation the first time, you know, I kind of, you know, tearfully said, yeah, well, I hope we have a chance to work together again. So I was really looking forward to that. And you know, Jim was by far the most experienced person on the team, and to kind of to lose that kind of insight that we had and had been able to rely on kind of from you know, multiple decades in industry, you know, was a blow, and you know, was very fearful about how we would then be able to continue to provide that, you know, leadership and the insights into the company. So I had to get creative, and I think this has maybe been a little bit of you know, another lesson learned. You know, I mean, every kind of challenge presents itself as an opportunity as well. And you kind of have to think outside the box and kind of push the envelope there. And so, you know, I didn't want to lose Jim's insights. And so we found a way to keep Jim engaged in the company in a very significant way, but also, you know, allowed him to pursue other things that he needed to do, particularly here in Chicago. We also had a couple of really great, you know, scientific leaders in the company who essentially got the opportunity to carve out their own leadership career path as a result, right? So there was an opportunity for those folks. And so, you know, really took the time over the next year after that to kind of learn about, you know, how these individuals could really step in. And eventually, you know, we just, you know, recently, actually a couple of weeks ago, we replaced Jim as Chief Scientific Officer for the first time now. So, you know, and that would have been impossible. And so kind of thinking creatively about how we can then chart the course. And I think as a result, there's been kind of a domino effect where kind of everybody in the company has had to kind of elevate their game kind of one level. And so, you know, while I was sad to see you go, I'm really pleased to see that you were able to, you know, kind of parlay that into some great successes for individuals at the company.
Right. So you've been very successful. You've done a lot right. What's an example of one thing you wish you'd done differently? You know, a regret or a do-over.
Yeah,
it is.
That's a tough question because actually you learn so much from the mistakes that you almost don't want the do-over, right? Because they really do teach you. And there's as many things on the other side of the ledger where you just got lucky and you're about to make a mistake, but you know, you got saved. And so it's hard to think about it in that way. You know, but
well, how about a mistake that you've learned from, you know, where you got away with it and but still would know how to do it better the next time? Yeah.
So I think people are just such an important ingredient. I mean, it just, you know, it doesn't matter how smart you are and how great you are as kind of the work that you're doing. If you can't connect with your colleagues in a way that motivates them, it's going to fall apart. And, you know, this is maybe one where we dodged a bullet. You know, there was you know, as we were looking for a new CMO, Jim and I were actually recruiting an individual together. And we had met two individuals, one who's currently our CMO, and he's doing fantastic. You know, he's a little bit of a quirky guy. And so you kind of had to, you know, it wasn't kind of the obvious.
And we never had any quirky guys.
Yeah, that's right. And there was somebody else who had kind of you know, extremely polished resumes, multiple drugs brought to the market, but was just kind of the most arrogant person you'd ever meet. And I can't understate that. I mean, I can't overstate how arrogant this individual was, to the point where, you know, he really caused us to think about whether he could be the right fit.
Well, he was going to remake the company in his image.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm not sure anybody else would need to be there. You know, and I think we were so, you know, just given kind of where we had come from on the development side, you know, we didn't do awesome in clinical development before this. And so really we're enamored with the fact that there was an individual here who had brought multiple drugs to market. And this could be somebody that we could recruit. And so we're willing to maybe turn a bit of a blind eye to some of the characteristics that he brought to the table. ultimately, I did offer him the job, and ultimately he did turn me down, and it was the best thing that happened. Because I think if he had accepted the job, I probably wouldn't be there right now.
Well, it'd certainly be a very different outcome. Yeah. I mean, he was definitely going to change things. Shift gears a little, non sequitur. What's the best book you've read this year?
This is not obvious. So I have a 9-year-old daughter who just loves to read. And she brought home, so we've kind of gotten into the habit of reading together every night for about 20, 30 minutes. And recently she brought a book home called The War That Saved My Life. It's meant for, it's a real book, but it's meant for younger kids. But it brought me to tears at the end of it, because it's about an 11-year-old girl who's growing up in London right around the time where Germany's about to invade England, and everyone's on edge. And she grows up in a very harsh environment. If you guys ever want to read it, I won't give it away, but has the opportunity is evacuated from London essentially because the war's coming, and ends up in an environment that is so much more nurturing and positive for her, but it can't seem to let go of the fact about how mistreated she was. It just kind of brought to light how much our individual experiences and our kind of baggage that we carry along with us, and how hard it is to kind of separate that sometimes with kind of where you need to get to. And it's quite telling how, it's the story written about an 11-year-old girl and how she kind of approached that. And
cool.
So my daughter and I kind of read that together, but I kind of think about that as a way, we kind of mindfully should try to overcome the challenges that we face kind of at home, at work, and think about ways that we can kind of overcome some of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, you're getting some mentoring from your 9-year-old daughter. It can come in from interesting places. Yeah. Who have been your mentors, your role models across your career? I think we all acknowledge how crucial it is, the role that mentoring plays as we're professionally developing. So who have yours been? Yeah,
I mean, there's a couple easy ones that I would just tick off. I mean, I think Constellation was launched by Third Rock Ventures, and actually, Third Rock Ventures is a venture group that forms and builds these companies, capitalizes them with a lot of money, but they also run the companies until they can recruit a full-time management team. And Mark Levin, who kind of was he built Millennium, and then he founded Third Rock Ventures. He was the first CEO, kind of interim part-time basis of Constellation. But he had this just innate, he's not a scientist, but he just has this knack for connecting with people and getting them unified to just want to believe and get things done that just seem impossible. And it just, that's, I could never, achieve what Mark has achieved in that realm, but I think about it as kind of an aspiration to kind of be able to connect with people the way that Mark Levin does. And actually, another Mark was Mark Goldsmith, who we both worked for. The next CEO of Constellation, who brought to the table, equally kind of motivating kind of way about him, but in a different way. It was really through kind of sheer kind of intellectual force. Nothing really got past Mark. You could be intimidated by it, but if you weren't intimidated by it and you just embraced the fact that this guy's just smarter than me, you can really kind of raise your game and kind of learn a lot. Mark taught me to not be afraid to voice my opinions and ideas, even if I'm talking to somebody who may seem to be kind of very expert. And when I did that, he was very easy to work with, I thought. Yeah. But then I'll point out, kind of one other example, which may not be so obvious. The most I've learned from are folks that I had the hardest time working for, that were different than me, that brought something different to the table where I didn't really gel with them. It turns out that those weren't long-term relationships. And I learned a lot about what I didn't want to do, but I also picked up a handful of things that they did really well that was different from me and was able to incorporate those. And I did that. I can think of 2 different instances where I worked for somebody where it just wasn't going to work long term, but I recognized a couple of things about those folks that I was able to incorporate.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting how, you relied on both Mark Levin and Mark Goldsmith because they are so different as individuals. But one of the things they have in common, and I think this is a crucial thing for a CEO, CEO's responsibility beyond keeping the company funded is giving people within the company permission to believe in the company's success, right? You've got to be able to paint a vision of success that the rest of the company can fall in love with, can fall in line with, that permission. And I think both Marks did that really well. I think Mark Levin through his charisma and his engagement with the people, and Mark Goldsmith just because he's so damn smart. You figure out if he believes this, it must make sense. When you're thinking about hiring people or partnering, what are the no-goes? What are the deal breakers for you? What are the, where's your third rail when it comes to things, places, people that you won't work with or won't do business with or won't hire? I mean, you touched on it a little bit with the CMO.
Yeah, I think as I reflect, on the team that we've built and, over the last kind of couple years now, and there's some folks that have been there for quite some time, and there are several new folks that we brought into the team. They're just a joy to work with, and we have so much fun together. And whenever we bring someone into, try to recruit somebody into the company, they all comment on how great the team is, how well they seem to work together. And so I think a couple of key things beyond kind of the to have the qualifications and all that stuff. Can you gel with the culture that we have, and have fun, and we have a lot of fun, we laugh together a lot, and that's kind of a critical component, is that we like to be around each other. And so if we don't like somebody, that's just not going to work. Right. The other piece that we have really kind of instituted is kind of be brutally honest, right, in a respectful manner, but let's not hold back. Be able to tell each other exactly how we feel, and let's not take it personally, because it's an opportunity to kind of take things to the next level. And so our management team meetings, we're telling each other what we really think, and no one really takes it personally, and I love that about our team, right? And there doesn't seem to kind of equate to an agenda that somebody may have, and I haven't been part of a team that's been this agenda free.
Right. And so, you talk about the culture and fits. You've also brought on a lot of new talent into the team. How do you get people up to speed with this culture, with the business values, and, recognizing that it's crucial for your success? How do you get people in, to be involved in that and to embrace the culture?
Yeah, it starts during the recruitment, actually, right? And so, I'm pretty transparent about kind of where things are in the company, what we're trying to do, what's working, what's not working, and what kind of the pitfalls might be. And then what I found by doing that, you've been able to find people who want to self-select into that. So generally, I haven't had to do a lot, actually. And we've been so busy that kind of we just needed people to kind of hit the ground running. And that's what's kind of happened. But because I think we put so much effort into trying to find and locate the right people that have the right temperament, they kind of self-select in and kind of buy in pretty quick.
Right. Another slight shift in gears. So, you're I don't mean this in a bad way, but you're a product of the Boston, Cambridge environment, right? And so that's clearly played a crucial role. How do you view biotech outside of that area, and in particular, any thoughts or impressions on Chicago as a, as an aspiring hub of biotech?
Yeah, I think there's no place like kind of the Boston, Cambridge area, but there are some things that we're missing that I think you can really tap into in other areas as well. And I think Chicago is ripe for that. There's multiple companies here where you have connections kind of into industry, and I think that's a major component of it. So I actually spent a few years in Baltimore. I think we also had that same question about how can we become more like Boston? How can we become more like the Bay Area? And one of the missing ingredients was that there wasn't, there's a lot of great academic work going on from institutions, great technology being invented, but there weren't enough people who kind of had the managerial experience to understand kind of how to recognize what you have and drive it to the next stage where you create a lot of value. And what we benefited from in Boston is that there's been multiple companies, Millennium, Genzyme, Biogen, and all of the talent that's kind of moved on from there kind of multiple times over, they all go out and they start and build new companies and they're looking for those technologies. And I guess I haven't seen a place kind of be able to replicate that with the sheer concentration that right. Boston has been able to. But we're missing some things, right? We don't have a lot of, we're great on the early stage stuff, but I think we're missing kind of later stage talent. There's not a lot of companies there that have actually commercialized drugs, right? And so I think, a place like Chicago, you've got, AbbVie, you've got, Takeda, has some presence here as well. It's Ellis. I mean, I think, that should be tapped into and kind of brought those experiences earlier. And I think, Jim, your own experience, I think coming here is also kind of, I think will help drive some of that as well.
Right. How do you see biotech changing? It's certainly changed since the late 90s.
Yeah.
But changes continues to be the order of the day. And so, what do you see over the next 5, 7, 10 years?
Well, I hope it stays robust, and that we don't kind of fall into with how exuberant and robust the capital markets have been, how easy it has been to raise money. I hope we don't revert to where it becomes equally robustly hard, because that's a possibility, I think, right? And I think one of the things I worry about is that, there's so many new people in the industry that don't remember kind of 10, 12 years ago, where it was just insanely difficult to launch companies and raise capital. And because they weren't a part of it then, and so you just you don't have the muscle memory to kind of avoid some of the same mistakes. And so I do worry a little bit that we could end up there. I think we won't, because there's enough real advancement that's been made where the products and the technologies that are being brought to bear are really game changing, and I think that'll see us through even kind of a more of a measured kind of capital market where fundraising might be more challenging. But so I definitely think things will tighten up a bit. It might become a little bit tougher in the biotech scene to kind of scale companies the way that we have. It was before it wasn't feasible to raise the $500 to $1 billion needed to get a drug approved. It's been possible. I'd love to see that continue. But if not, we're going to have to find more creative ways, right? Each challenge brings an opportunity, and we'll have to find, partners to work with and new ways to do things.
Cool. So why don't we open it up to some questions from the audience as well. So we've got microphones here available. If people want to ask a question, raise your hand.
I'll start. Very nice to know you.
Thank you.
Concerning your management style, you said that when you meet with your leadership team, that you're open to discussion and stuff like that. Who makes the final decision? Does the CEO always make the final decision, or do you have your CSO where you say, okay, when it's science related, let that person make those decisions?
Yeah, so it's actually, this is great. That's a great point that you make, because it's something that we struggle with right now. Where sometimes I feel like I'm asked to make too many decisions. And I've been pretty, I kind of pretty hard lined about this, where I refuse to make the decision sometimes because I'm not the right person to make the decision, right? So I don't know enough about it, right? And we want to bring in people who have enough confidence and awareness that they can make the decision. So I've been trying to kind of push that kind of back to kind of our CSO, CMO, and really want that to continue and cascade throughout the company. I mean, there's levels of responsibility that we should expect from people, but kind of within that band of that level of responsibility, we should expect them to make the decision. And so it actually irritates me, when a lot of times I was the only person in the company when I got there that could sign a contract. And it really irritated me because I had no idea. I'm asked to sign a $3 million work order, and I have no idea what this is about. And it doesn't make sense for me to go spend the time to figure it out. I'd rather have the functional area head who owns that take that responsibility and approve it. So I think finding ways to kind of delegate is kind of very key in leadership.
One more question. One of the challenges, I think, in the starting biotech is to decide when to stop the research and move to the development. And, unlike...
I didn't plant this question, Jigar. I did not plant this question.
So unlike in software that people put like a beta version and they fix it on the way.
Yeah.
We tinker, we're scientists. Many of us in the room are scientists, are starting up and they think they have something. And then you go to tweak it, make it a bit better and keep on going, and then you will never finish. Mm-hmm. So can you give us some insight how you make a decision of what's your tree or decision tree about how you say, okay, this is good enough, move it forward?
Okay, I thought you were asking me a different question.
But
yeah, no, that's an excellent point because you can keep, and we just had an instance of this last year, or actually this year, where we were trying to push a molecule into the clinic with a best-in-class profile in that target space. And, the team, I think, could have worked, asymptotically, and never got to the finish line. Because there's always something else that we can improve. And I think, that's kind of where real-world experience, kind of meets kind of the I guess the science of the possibilities that you can achieve, right? And that was part of the reason why I really wanted to keep Jim plugged in. We've got some excellent scientists in the company, but many of them don't have enough experience to kind of recognize, this is good enough, and we can push this forward. And I think you kind of learn that probably over time empirically, where sometimes you might wait too long and you might miss the train once or twice, and then you kind of figure out how to do that the right way. Jim, did you want to comment on that?
Well, I mean, I also think where possible, you try and introduce some objective criteria, right? And I think often when you're doing something for the first time, it's hard to know what's possible. But I think that was a discipline that we tried to introduce. It's very difficult when you're judging everything relative, because the more work you do, you're smart, you're doing good experiments, you will continue to make progress. And so by, defining some a priori criteria around success in advance of achieving it, I think is really helpful, and it's a useful discipline to have. It doesn't always make the decision for you, but I think it becomes a really good yardstick for making that decision. Nelson?
Can I ask a question? So with limited discretionary innovation dollars, so I want you to answer this from the biotech perspective and from a university perspective. Let's say you had $10 million and you're allowed to spend it however you want to create innovation. Where would you put your money? Would you go for incremental innovation, small innovation index? You create the best-in-class compound for that series or whatever with an established market and move forward. So I'll give an example from my experience with Abbott or AbbVie. So that would be Humira. That would be third to the market, antibody for TNF alpha. And there's already 2 Enbrel and infliximab has already been there, but you're the best. And so you're $18 billion a year in sales for that. But you're low innovation. The mechanism of action is very well understood. You came very late to the party, but you grabbed all the food, everybody's lunch. Or you invest in very, very innovative, extremely risky, technologies or mechanism of action. I'll give an example. That would be venetoclax for AbbVie again, BCL2, MCL type of anti-apoptosis drugs. It takes you about 17 years, but you're the first to the market and you grab it all. And, where would you, so given those two examples, where would you put your money? Yeah. If you were a university, like Illinois Ventures, where should they be investing their POC dollars? Or, what type of projects would they be picking?
If I'm not mistaken, I think venetoclax emerged through a relationship that AbbVie had formed with a small company called Audia.
That's correct.
And so I think your kind of the examples you provided actually paint a really good picture about what innovation could look like in different organizations. And not to say that large companies, I don't mean this to mean that large companies can't do really hard things that are, game-breaking innovations. But I think that they're well suited to execute on the incremental innovations like you talked about, right? Because, bringing kind of the third to market TNF inhibitor to bear would take an enormous amount of resources that wouldn't be available to kind of a small company or a university. And kind of showing that they are actually best in class, would take a lot to show, especially in markets like, large areas like psoriasis and, rheumatoid arthritis. So from a kind of biotech small company perspective, I would always kind of go for the high science, extreme innovation. Let's work on what's really hard and that, may not make the cut for, larger companies who have to just prioritize driving revenues and kind of keeping the top line growing. Eventually they're going to need that because those top lines will stop growing. And that's kind of the example of how kind of IDUN was driving that, and AbbVie was able to kind of jump in on that and build that product with them. So from a kind of a small company biotech perspective, we want to work on kind of really hard new stuff as much as we can. I guess the same probably should be true kind of in universities where you're, maybe more so, where, this is where kind of the ideas of the hard stuff is actually are kind of nucleating and kind of coming to fruition for the first time. Yeah,
I mean, because I think at least, within the university system, there are two streams of reward. Firstly, there's simply the reward of revealing something, the creation of the knowledge. That's part of the university mission as well, is to learn what's real and what's possible. And so even if the answer is negative, so I think that gives the ability to ask more open-ended questions, greater uncertainty, because, from the pure science, it also then allows for greater risk tolerance on the things that have therapeutic or commercial value if, in fact, the answers turn to be true. Greg's going to comment on that.
No, not on that at all. So actually, I've got an answer for Arnon's question, which is, when is technology ready to go? That's when someone gives you $5 million. You don't ask any questions. But my question to you, I mean, you're a young guy, you're doing very well. You've been in a similar career for a long time. So where are you going to be in 5 and 10 years?
Oh, I can't plan that far ahead. I think, I'm really focused right now on just driving, we set out a vision for Constellation to, launch a drug in the next, now 4 years. It was 5 years last year. And so, I'd like to be able to bring that vision to fruition. Kind of beyond that, I haven't really given a lot of thought to it. I'm having a lot of fun kind of doing what I'm doing. I mean, it's a great job. It's a lot of fun. I mean, maybe if we get to a place where it makes sense for me to go do something different, maybe start all over again and try to build another company. It sounds like fun.
Sure, Zach.
Constellation was founded with the idea that epigenetics was going to be a big therapeutic area, a lot of promise, a lot of encouraging data at the time. In the last, say, 15, 20 years, there's been a big shift in where there are some drugs out there. They're not the best. There are some new ones that are coming out. Where do you see this field of epigenetics moving? And is that still the company's main goal to focus on this particular area? Or is it more of an idea of, okay, it's been, that ship sailed, and now let's expand to other mechanisms of therapeutic intervention?
Yeah, we think that the field is still in its kind of early phases, actually. I think we're kind of in the second, third inning of the game right now. And I think it's hard to argue that aberrant gene transcription that's epigenetically regulated or misregulated isn't driving disease, right? I think the challenge that we faced is how do we take the biochemistry of these enzymes or proteins, link that to biology. I think we've done a good job at that. But where we've been missing is, and where Constellation actually is investing an incredible amount of time right now, is how do we take then that biochemistry to biology link, coupled with great drug discovery, but then drive that to the patient and translational work to identify how can I run trials in a way that I have a way to identify the patients that are going to benefit from this biology. And it's not, I don't want to characterize it trivial, but it's a lot easier when you have, kind of a mutation in the target, and that defines your patient population. That's not the case in epigenetics. And so we have to invest a lot more. And what we're trying to do now is invest at the very beginning. So when we launch kind of target validation efforts, even before drug discovery starts, to be setting ourselves up that we can have those hypotheses in hand that we can test immediately in the clinic, by the time we file the IND. And to me, it's not so different than kind of where, other fields have kind of gone through that don't, so I would say immunotherapy has kind of gone through the same, kind of trajectory where didn't quite know which patients were going to benefit. And then we kind of got lucky with this one CTLA-4 study that demonstrated that, if you treat long enough, you can actually see a survival benefit. And then that really created this huge force to kind of invest in the translational work that's then led to now, a lot more, breakthroughs and innovation. And just kind of generally, I think all of these scientific areas go through various peaks and valleys in terms of their attractiveness. I mean, right now, gene therapy, cell therapy is all the rage. When I started in biotech, those are dirty words. You wouldn't, no one should actually go into those areas because those are graveyards. So I think there's a lot more to talk about kind of in the field of epigenetics, and I think there's a lot more to be uncovered there.
Yeah, I think what it shows, though, if you're going to do meaningful drug discovery that actually has an impact on patients, that you can't just look at one singular aspect. It's not just the target, or it's not just the molecular biology or the pure drug discovery, or it's not just the clinical development. And I think one of the burdens of epigenetics, at least in the early years, is that we tried to apply very traditional genetic-based patient selection strategies, and I don't think they were adequate for what we were doing. I think they worked preclinically, but they didn't translate clinically, and I think we're learning a lot more sophisticated. And I think you're exactly right on the immunotherapy, where let's look for PD-L1 levels as the marker for patient selection for the anti-PD-1s, and it doesn't work. It's harder than that. It's more complicated, and I think we found the same thing in epigenetics. Sure, we got a microphone for you. Oh, sorry.
Okay,
We'll go.
Yeah, my question is that when you think is the good time to have your timing to start a company? You have a great product, but when you think you're ready?
So the question is, when do you think you're ready?
What's a good time to start a company?
Okay. Well, that's really kind of context, and like epigenetics, it's context dependent, I guess, right? I think if it's like a big vision, kind of new platform, new therapeutic modality that has broad applicability, probably earlier is better, because you're going to need a lot of investment to kind of bring that to fruition. Probably outstrips what you can achieve in the context of a lab. And so maybe earlier is better, kind of put maybe, CRISPR kind of in this category. But maybe if your goal is to kind of drive to a, on an individual target with maybe a more tried and true, you might want to push it a little bit further, where you've got, validating kind of hypotheses that you can test. Maybe you've got some early chemical matter that can be optimized. You certainly will get a lot more credit for it, I guess, in that context, right? So, some of the challenge, if you start too early, by the time it actually, becomes something that's meaningfully valuable in the eyes of, patients and companies, the contribution of the initial inventors may become too diluted with all the capital that need to be raised to get there. So I think it ends up being kind of depending on the context of how you're thinking about that.
It kind of goes back to Greg's answer to Arnon's question. It's, can you raise money and with an appropriate valuation? Yeah. And if you've got access to the funds through other means without creating the company, then it allows you to potentially raise that money at a higher valuation.
Maybe I would also add to that, though. It's not just about, maybe where I disagree a little bit, it's not just about can you get it funded today. You really critically need to think about how much is going to be needed to make this a kind of meaningful advance, right, for the masses, right? And if it's going to take, 50 times what I was just given right now, I'm not going to be able to participate in that over the long run. And so whatever piece I own right now is going to get completely diluted out, right? So critically thinking about how much you need to get there eventually is also important.
Right.
So one more question. So what do you think working with pharmaceutical company directly or versus you have your own startups? I know there are pros and cons, but what's your perspective?
Well, I'm a little biased, I guess. It's self-serving, or I think you should work with the pharma companies directly. No, but I think there's a lot, for us to gain by working with academic groups that can, have access to technologies, models that we may not have yet because it hasn't become mainstream and to really answer important questions. And so we have a lot to gain from that. We don't like to pay for it though. And so it ends up being difficult sometimes for scientists to feel like they're getting kind of full credit for the effort and the energy they're putting into it. Ultimately, I think it needs to be a balance. If you start too early on your own, it'd be really hard to get there on your own, but you also don't want to give it away either. And so I think you've got to form the right relationships, build that trust, get to the right balance, kind of, talk early about what's important to you. I think we're doing this right now with, on that one program in the CNS space where, I think that academic investigator is being very open about what she wants, and we're trying to find a way to meet.
Hopefully, we can find that right middle ground. Go.
Yeah, hi. Sort of a naive question as a scientist who has, let's say, something of interest or a compound that could be potentially therapeutic and is looking to get an investment in or to work with a company to develop it. What kinds of things are you, not maybe you particular, but the field in general, what kinds of things are you looking for in terms of, the product, the indication? How do you evaluate, and how does the field in general evaluate what you're going to invest in?
Yeah, certainly, depending on kind of what field you're in, is the space you're working in going to, in a meaningful way, kind of change the paradigm? At least that's how we would think about it, right? If we wanted to bring in something into the company from the outside, it would need to be significantly, meaningfully better than what you can do today, right? So, I guess we'll use immunotherapy as a good example, where I think we've learned a lot about what you can pursue in tumors that are infiltrated with immune cells, but clearly there's still a big barrier to finding a way to bring immunotherapy to cold tumors and ones that don't have immune cells in them. And so if there's technologies that can really break that barrier, those are really interesting to us kind of in that space. But also the kind of the quality of the product itself. The drug discovery has been done to kind of the standards that we need to have it be at to bring it into the clinic and develop it in a way that is feasible for patients ultimately. Because you don't want to then license it and then ultimately learn that you have to kind of double back and then start all over again. So that becomes a very important component to it too. And I'm sure those are some of the things that you're looking into these days as you're looking at technology.
And also the data set that you have that says the molecule is doing what we're arguing it does in a measurable and demonstrable way that actually translates into the clinic. Because you can take more risk if you've got a finite clinical trial that's going to give you an objective readout, as opposed to I'm going to have to move into an inpatient study in Alzheimer's and treat for 3 years before I know, right? And trying to figure out so I think, there are multiple dimensions, so I think it is the unmet medical need and, is it paradigm changing? I think it's the quality of the science underpinning, and then it's the path to actually knowing and demonstrating that you have what you argue you have versus not, and how expensive or possible that is.
Yes, so my question is based off of the unmet medical needs moving into looking at novel therapies or novel technologies, looking at all those, and to see what your advice is to this type of group that are looking at those from a research base and early on, where Constellation just has, I think your JAK inhibitor just received accelerated status for your phase 2 product, and you've got a couple in phase 1. So what type of advice would you give this group for interactions with regulatory agencies, FDA, EMA, any agencies that you...
I was going to ask you for advice.
Well, but I want to see from yours lessons learned that you may have, either from Constellation or from other companies you've been with, because you've been at this early stage and on the industry side of it, not just...
I mean...
I've seen it from the FDA side too. But.
Yeah. We're lucky, actually. Our chief medical officer actually used to work at the FDA. And so he has a lot of insight into what it takes to get a drug approved and kind of which kind of buttons to push and levers to pull. And when it's useful and beneficial to kind of approach and talk to the FDA and when it's not. I probably think that most companies don't have a good handle on that, and they do fumble their interactions. It's not my area of expertise. I'm really glad that we have Adrian to kind of help us navigate that. It's actually our kind of the phase 2 product that we have that we got fast tracked for recently was our BET inhibitor. This is a molecule that we have some really exciting data emerging on this molecule, and I know Adrian's thinking very intently on what's the right time to approach the FDA to have discussions around is this a breakthrough? What do I need to get this to be a breakthrough? But he doesn't want to do it too soon either, because if you don't have enough of the package, then
because you may only get to have that conversation once,
that's
right?
That's
and
right. So I think it is kind of it does take a little bit of judgment, and having that experience is crucial. And certainly I'm not the expert in that.
I mean, one of the things that I find a little bit surprising, I actually think the FDA is fairly transparent. Yeah. They publish a great deal, and yet I find that many people who are working in this space, fail to read the guidance documents, fail to read, what's out there. And so I do think, some of this is more straightforward than we make it.
But I think that, by the way, FDA, I think, has been extraordinary in the last 5 to 10 years. I think they're really working hard to partner with companies to help them succeed, more so than what was happening.
Yeah, I mean, I think so too. We've engaged them pretty extensively in the Alzheimer's field, to try and find, and there's been a great dialogue with Rusty Katz and that group to try and figure out what are the, registrable endpoints and how do you do patient selection and stratification and, realizing that, it's just not possible, in diseases where we still don't know enough, how do you, so I think you're right, Jigar. I think they've done a pretty remarkable job, but I think keeping an open dialogue with them and paying attention to what they are saying, I think makes sense. I think we're approaching the witching hour. Oh, yeah, Dimitra?
So I have maybe a little bit of a loaded question and maybe some advice you can give to some of our technical founders. What's the best case scenario and worst case scenario of an equity stake at the end when a company is successful for the technical founder that you know of? So like somebody who started at 100%, but in order to be successful and exit, what equity stake did they have at the end?
Yeah.
What do you have any recommendations for retaining control or giving up control in order to be successful?
Yeah. I'll be honest, most of the examples that I've been involved in, at the end of the day, there's not much there. So finding a way, I think, to solve that, is a very kind of fair thing that, I'm sure you guys are thinking about. But there have been some good examples. I think, probably, some of the more recent ones have been around that have happened with UPenn. Has I think a really great job at negotiating deals with industry, where they have retained a lot of ownership in their companies. I think Spark was probably a really good example of that around kind of the gene therapy treatment that they had there, and also with the CAR T technologies that Novartis brought forward. I think the UPenn did quite well there.
Sage did a pretty decent job with that. Really? I think both Steve and WashU ended up with a reasonable representation in that value when they went public.
And then Juno did probably, I think, as well. I think probably in all those circumstances, the development kind of path ended up being fairly rapid, right? So it took less time and maybe a little, the money was certainly, not less money, but it took less time. Maybe just so there was less dilution that occurred to those equity stakes.
Yeah, I think, in my opinion, all of those that you mentioned, as well as Sage, a fairly mature asset at the time that, it emerged. On Sage, they had they actually had an open IND that they inherited from the folks at WashU. And so, here you've got a real clinical program. And so that allowed for that.
Yeah. So probably the lesson is to kind of try to push it as far as you can, but doing so in a manner where you're not making too many mistakes. And so actually, I think what you guys are doing here is phenomenal, because I think the goal is that, right, to fund things, push them as far as you can, but to bring some kind of experience to the mix, so that you're making the right choices, not choosing the wrong CROs, not building, So I think that's kind of having that kind of industrialized mentality is probably the right way to go about it.
Any final question? Well,
So in your opinion, what set of skills one needs to be a successful CEO?
So I think there's we talked about the being a CEO in 4 easy steps, right? So one is that you have to have a vision, a vision that you can articulate very simply, and that you can recite, maybe even one sentence. And that's what we did at Constellation. We came up with a vision that everyone could get behind, and actually completely ease decision making, because then you can fit what fits in the box and what doesn't of this vision. The next is to build a team that can deliver on that vision. So certainly I don't have the expertise personally to do it myself, but I know how to connect with people and get the right people in. And the third piece is to tell the story in a way that you can raise money. And a lot of times, as great as our scientific team is, they want to show everything that they've done, and that doesn't help in telling a story, right? And so, kind of being able to kind of take the scientific data, craft it into something that you can pitch in a short amount of time to get investors to want to invest is something that I've been able to hone. And the last piece is kind of rinse and repeat. And you just got to keep doing that. And that's what I spend all my time doing, really. It's just kind of refining the vision, constantly trying to meet people to see who I can recruit, even if I don't need to have an opening, trying to find people that I think could help us, and then raising money.
I mean, I'll speak to this and use some of Jigar's prior examples, and I think it's a useful point. There's diverse formula for becoming a very effective CEO. Mark Levin, your first example, I think is an outstanding CEO. He's been successful on many occasions, big companies, small companies, and did it from a person-centric relationship kind of perspective. Mark Goldsmith, another repeat successful CEO, brilliant scientist, MD, PhD from UCSF, immunologist, hardcore on the science, yet pulled together the whole. And then you're a different phenotype. You're kind of a hybrid between the two. But I think it shows that, there's more than one way to be a very skilled and effective, yet you all have those core skills that you mentioned, the ability to create a vision and to communicate it, the ability to connect and engage with people and know where to find that expertise and to build a team, and then the ability to go out and tell that story in a compelling way that allows you to fund the company. And I think, I think a great example of that. So please join me in thanking Jigar. I think this has been a really enjoyable conversation.